Hey listeners, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts podcast. This humble show is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, yours truly included, and all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. The image of the Caribbean as a realm of swashbucklers, treasure chests, and daring exploits has been firmly etched into popular imagination by literature, film, and folklore. Yet beneath the romantic veneer lies a far more complex and historically grounded reality. The Caribbean was for centuries a theater of intense economic, political, and maritime activity, in which piracy emerged as both a symptom and an agent of colonial, commercial, and social dynamics. From the late 16th century to the early 18th century, the period often termed the Golden Age of piracy. The Caribbean Sea was a crossroads of European imperial ambition, indigenous resistance, and African labor systems. Within this context, piracy was neither an anomaly nor purely criminal. It was a rational, adaptive response to the structures of empire and trade that dominated the region, shaping both the lives of individuals and the trajectories of colonial powers. And here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The origins of Caribbean piracy are inseparable from the broader currents of European expansion in the Atlantic world. Following Christopher Columbus's voyages at the close of the 15th century, Spain established a formidable network of colonies and maritime routes that channeled wealth, particularly gold and silver, from the Americas to Europe. The Iberian monopoly over transatlantic commerce created immense economic incentives for interdiction and theft, both by rival European powers and by independent mariners. English, French, and Dutch privateers, sanctioned by their governments through letters of marque, were among the earliest organized adversaries of Spanish shipping. These privateers operated legally during wartime, attacking Spanish treasure fleets under the pretext of national service. Yet their activities often blurred into outright piracy, especially when governments changed, peace treaties were enacted, or commissions expired. Figures such as Sir Francis Drake and Henry Morgan began their careers within this quasi-legal framework, navigating the fine line between privateering and piracy, while accumulating both personal wealth and notoriety. By the late 17th century, the Caribbean's colonial economy, rooted in sugar, tobacco, and other cash crops, produced both enormous wealth and equally pronounced vulnerabilities. Merchant vessels laden with valuable commodities became prime targets, and colonial authorities often struggled to enforce law and order across the dispersed archipelagos and vast stretches of open sea. The geography of the region, with its numerous islands, hidden coves, and shallow channels, offered ideal conditions for maritime raiders to stage ambushes, evade capture, and resupply covertly. Pirates adapted to these conditions with remarkable ingenuity, employing small, fast ships capable of navigating shoals inaccessible to larger naval vessels. Their operations combined opportunity with strategy, intelligence about convoy movements, local knowledge of tides and wind patterns, and social networks across ports enabled raiders to intercept targets efficiently. The so-called pirate republics of Tortuga, Port Royal, and Nassau emerged as hubs of this activity, providing safe harbors, markets for stolen goods, and communal spaces where codes of conduct and governance evolved among pirate crews. The social organization of Caribbean pirate communities offers quite a striking contrast to the hierarchical structures of contemporary European navies and colonial administrations. Pirate ships often operated under surprisingly democratic principles for the era. with captains elected by the crew and major decisions subject to collective vote. Divisions of spoils followed codified agreements as well, sometimes known as articles, which guaranteed shares not only to officers, but to ordinary sailors, injured crew members, and sometimes even slaves or non-European allies. At the same time, pirate codes enforced discipline and outlined punishment for theft, desertion, and cowardice, illustrating that even within the ostensibly lawless world of piracy, order and regulation were essential to operational success. The personal lives and identities of Caribbean pirates were equally complex, shaped by the multicultural, multi-ethnic context. Pirates included men and women of European, African, and indigenous descent, as well as escaped slaves, mutineers, and disaffected privateers. Women, though a minority among raiders, sometimes assumed positions of authority, most famously Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who sailed in the early 18th century under the banner of buccaneers in the Caribbean and demonstrated both martial skill and strategic acumen. Enslaved or formerly enslaved individuals occasionally joined pirate crews as well, leveraging the relative freedom and opportunity for profit that piracy offered as a form of resistance against colonial exploitation. The fluidity of pirate identity challenged rigid colonial hierarchies, as I mentioned, enabling the construction of hybrid, transnational communities in which allegiance was defined less by birthright and more by skill, loyalty, and shared interest in plunder. Piracy in the Caribbean, however, was not merely a local or marginal phenomenon. It had profound geopolitical implications. European powers were acutely aware of the threat posed by pirates to trade and revenue. The Spanish crown, in particular, viewed Caribbean piracy as a persistent menace to its transatlantic treasure fleets, prompting repeated naval campaigns to suppress raiders and fortify key ports. England, France, and the Netherlands, meanwhile, balanced suppression with opportunistic tolerance as pirate activity sometimes served as a strategic tool against rivals. The infamous exploits of Henry Morgan, who led raids on Spanish settlements in Panama and elsewhere, were celebrated in London as acts of national service, even as they exemplified classic piracy aggression. This ambivalent relationship between state power and piracy really shows the contested nature of legality in the Caribbean, where definitions of crime, legitimacy, and reward were quite inseparable from the strategic and economic interests of empires. By the early 18th century, however, the golden age of Caribbean piracy began to wane. Several factors contributed to this decline. European naval powers, having consolidated their colonies and strengthened maritime patrols, increasingly suppressed pirate enclaves. Treaties formalized territorial claims and reduced the utility of privateering as a quasi-legal occupation. Simultaneously, colonial economies matured, and new financial instruments and shipping practices made piracy less profitable and more risky. Prominent pirates were captured and executed in public, including the notorious Blackbeard, whose demise in 1718 symbolized the end of an era. By the mid-18th century, piracy in the Caribbean had largely been contained, relegated to the margins of maritime activity, though sporadic outbreaks continued in less policed areas, simply symbolizing the persistence of the socioeconomic conditions that initially fostered the very phenomenon. The historical record of the Caribbean piracy is quite uneven but rich, combining official colonial reports, trial records, personal diaries, and contemporary publications. These sources reveal a nuanced portrait of life at sea and the interconnected network of commerce, violence, and governance that shaped the Caribbean world. They also highlight the cultural and symbolic resonance of piracy, both for participants and for observers. Pirates cultivated distinctive codes of dress, behavior, and ritual, which communicated status, skill, and affiliation, and those markers were widely recognized in port towns along the maritime routes. Literary accounts, most famously Daniel Defoe's A General History of Pirates from 1724, contributed to the myth of piracy, blending real reports, moral instruction, and adventure narrative in ways that have influenced popular imagination for centuries. Yet the gap between myth and reality remains quite substantial. many pirates were pragmatic actors, motivated less by romance than by economic necessity and opportunity, navigating a precarious maritime economy in which fortune and death were often inseparable. Hopefully today's episode has inspired you to seek out and learn more about this subject. For answers to questions, sources for today's episode, to leave a comment, or check out upcoming guest announcements, visit www.historyshortspodcast.com or look for History Shorts Podcast on Facebook and X. Stay curious, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.